Hello and welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. It's December 11th, 2024. I'm Harley Schlanger and I will be your host. Questions and comments to Helga can be sent via email to questions@schillerinstitute.org, or you can post them in the chat page. Let me begin by saying that for those not familiar with the Schiller Institute, we just celebrated the 40th anniversary of its founding with a powerful conference on the topic of the dialogue among civilizations. We'll provide a link to that conference for you in the description section, and you'll see that the Schiller Institute has become an increasingly influential forum for serious discussion among rational actors globally. So let's begin with the dangerous and complex strategic conjuncture we face today, which was the major subject of the weekend conference. Helga, the transatlantic world and its unipolar order, dominated by the City of London and Wall Street, continue to escalate military confrontations to prevent the emergence of a new strategic and development architecture. There's talk of winning a nuclear war from a leading official of the Strategic Command in the United States, a new multi-million-dollar package of arms and weapons and aid delivered to Ukraine, and reliable reports of U.S. involvement in the toppling of the Assad government in Syria. Where do you see this headed, and what can be done to reverse it?
Well, I think it's heading towards nuclear war. All the signs are pointing in this direction. Newsweek of this week has apparently an article, what would a third world war look like? I will spare you the fantasies going into this article. As you mentioned, this is being officially discussed in the United States. On the 20th of November, there was a conference of the CSIS think tank in Washington, where Rear Admiral Thomas Buchanan, who is the head or director of STRATCOM, that's the Strategic Nuclear Weapons Command of the United States, he, in an unbelievable, nonchalant way, said in an interview with Heather Williams that the United States should be prepared to conduct a nuclear war in order to maintain the hegemonic position of the United States, to remain leader in the world. However, they should make sure that after such a nuclear exchange, enough nuclear weapons are remaining so that future adversaries can also be deterred. And I really would urge you to look at that short interview because, when you look at somebody who is talking in such a way about the annihilation, extinction of the human species, because the idea that you could have a limited nuclear war and then continue with your geopolitical games as if nothing has happened is absolutely insane and will not happen, because the likelihood that if it comes to that, all nuclear weapons will be used and a nuclear winter will follow and there will be no life left on the planet. So what this guy is talking about, in order to keep the leading position of the United States in the world, to risk the entire human species, when you watch this and you don't have cold shoulders over your back, then you're not in the real world. It is absolutely mind-boggling that such a statement could be made, and with the exception of Scott Ritter and myself, to my knowledge, I have not seen anybody else speaking out against it. I made this very important point in my speech at the conference you just referenced, and Scott Ritter did likewise, and then he repeated it in an evening event he had with some other forces in Washington on the same day, Pearl Harbor Day, on the 7th of December. But there should have been an outcry of people, saying, is this the official strategy? Has this been discussed in the parliaments of the NATO members? Is that what we want? obviously nothing of this sort has occurred. And I think together with all the other signs, Pistorius of Germany talking about making Germany war ready, all kinds of preparations to beef up the war readiness of various institutions in Europe. We are on the path of World War III, and the population has to wake up. I mean, the other major development naturally was the earthquake, which happened with the collapse of the Syrian state. One has to say it's not just the departure of Assad as president, but the strategic implication of the change that means for the entire Middle East is horrible. It's a catastrophe, and you can see how these major shifts are the kind of blocks of territory or foundation of the world system, which start to shake and break, and that is the prelude to a world war. So the only positive thing I can say is that we proved with our conference on the weekend, where we had an outstanding number of top-level people from many countries, from the United States, from Russia, China, the global South, and we all engaged in a strategic discussion, which was optimistic, future-oriented, solution-oriented. And I can only urge you, if you haven't done this yet, take the time on an evening or a weekend and watch these speeches, because you get a sense how easy it would be, to get society and the whole world politics back on a rational basis, because there are these people who are experienced diplomats, are experienced analysts who have a relationship to sanity and are not involved in this nuclear game theory, and just the idea that they make war games, with scenarios, playing this option, that option, and this is all void of any sense of reality of what the human species is all about. So please watch this conference, because I think what we discussed there in terms of the strategic situation, the economic solution to the migrant question, the question of the role of science in a future new paradigm, and emphatically also a very, very delightful panel on the culture of the different civilizations, and why we have to have a dialogue to get us out of this dark age in which we are presently in. So that would be my advice, because people have to equip themselves with a positive notion of the future if we want to mobilize the energy to get out of this mortal danger of mankind.
You're listening to Helga Zepp-LaRouche talking about the conference of the Schiller Institute this last weekend that is posted at the Schiller Institute website. You can go there and watch the 4 separate panels, and hopefully we'll have some sections of important presentations and dialogue among the panelists that will be posted separately. Now, we received a number of questions on the departure of Syrian President Assad and its implications. Let me start with a sample of these questions from a regular viewer, Tomas. He writes, "The fall of the Syrian government will possibly change everything in the region and beyond that. It seems to be a major setback for the BRICS process and the Palestinian cause. Do you think the Israeli regime will be given a green light by President-elect Trump to finish the job, because no country will do anything to stop them?"
Well, I don't know. I can only agree with you that it's a major, major catastrophe for the entire region. I think it means, as of now, that the Syrian state is practically gone. The new leadership, al-Jolani, he was a person on whom the Western powers had until very recently put a bounty of $10 million, because he was Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra. He came out of this entire network. And you have to think about it. This is the same network of jihadists which the United States claims was responsible for 9/11. Now, that the United States would now, and everybody else is now working with the people who at least had 3,000 people in the World Tower, in New York on their conscience. I don't know how these people managed to do this. What it means for Syria, which after all is one of the ancient civilizations with a very proud cultural background. I mean, this country is absolutely destroyed. And we should remember that before 2011, before the so-called Arab Spring was sprung on Syria and other countries, Syria was a peaceful country, an ecumenical coexistence of many religions. Women were absolutely in a position to wear Western clothes. You had infrastructure, you had an absolutely functioning state. And what is now at stake is that Syria is in acute danger of falling into a situation like Libya, a failed state, where different factions continue fighting. Nothing functions anymore. And, one can trace it back to, actually the Arab Spring, which it was always said that, Assad started a civil war and the brutal dictator against his own population. I mean, we were on the scene, not in Syria, but politically watching this at the time. And it was, a destabilization of all Arab countries at the time. But a lot of the so-called rebels in Syria came from Libya, from Benghazi. A lot of weapons were transformed. And, we should not forget that General Flynn tried to warn Obama in 2012 that the United States was backing all the wrong forces in Syria, which Obama didn't want to hear. Now then, basically, this foreign instigated rebellion was naturally a major blow. And, especially when then the sanctions were imposed on Syria, and especially after the so-called Caesar's sanctions were imposed, the living standard of the Syrian population dramatically plunged. The recent reports before the recent developments was that 95% or so of the Syrian population were below the poverty line, were food insecure, and obviously under these conditions, one can say that Assad failed to modernize the Syrian army, but it looks like, they just did not have the means to do it. Now, I can only say that the Western narrative, which is being presented about what happened, is like a parallel universe. And I can only advise you, there are a couple of Mideast experts or experts who are, very familiar with the history of the region, and you should take the time to listen to them. For example, I found the analysis of the Swiss analyst Jacques Beau, who is coming from a neutral country. I think he still has a sort of official position in the Swiss army. Very, very instructive, because he takes it back to the failed interventionist wars following 9/11, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, what happened in Syria as being part of that. And you should listen to it, because he's, in my view, a very balanced analyst who has no reason to be on one side or another. And it is an eye-opener. Then others like Alistair Crook, former British diplomat and intelligence official, also gives a piece of the picture. Pepe Escobar has a very instructive analysis. Scott Ritter, and there are probably many others I have now not listed. But you should listen to this and get a real story about what happened in the Middle East, because the idea, the placative idea, people are jubilating because Assad, the dictator, is now gone. I mean, this is so wrong and can only lead to further catastrophe, because obviously, the Palestinian cause now is in absolute nightmarish condition, because without Syria, and without the Syria being the connection between Iran and Hezbollah, um, who will care now about the Palestinians? What we have been talking about many times is will continue. The slaughter of the Palestinians is ongoing. Turkey is now jubilant because they will have part of northeast Syria. Israel will have part of Syria. They have now occupied the Golan. They have taken the occupied Golan Heights and even have troops until 25 kilometers in front of Damascus. The United States will for sure fortify their position, where they extract the oil and grain and other things from their part of Syria. And the remaining part, basically the strip from Aleppo to Hama to Homs to Damascus and Latakia, that is occupied now by this new liberal democratic jihadist, as Charles Freeman, in a very I forgot to mention Charles Freeman as an analyst. The reformed liberal jihadist who is now wearing a Zelensky suit, meaning he has NATO olive cloth. I mean, this is absolutely terrible. What will happen to Iran? They are severely weakened. Hezbollah severely weakened. And, however, that the different factions are not all homogeneous, because you have people allying more with the Muslim Brotherhood. Others are opposed to that. So the whole situation has all the signs of a future explosion along the lines of Libya. So, I don't see a short solution out of this, unless you do what we discussed at our conference, that you really have to stop this, because it leads to a third world war. Because if this policy of demonizing Russia, China, and now naturally Iran and North Korea, if that continues, and all this talk about limited nuclear war, which is winnable, I mean, I think that we are on a short road to the end of this civilization. And I don't know, Trump has promised that he wants to end all wars. I hope, one never should give up hope, that may be the case. But, I don't know if his recent statements on that Netanyahu should finish the job in Gaza as quickly as possible, if they really are reason to be very hopeful. So I can only say we have to mobilize the population everywhere. We have to stand up for the existence of civilization. We have to go to a new paradigm. I think we have to absolutely overcome this geopolitical disease and start to think about the one humanity first, because if we don't do that, we all may not exist in the short term. So I think what we discussed at the conference, that we have to have a new security and development architecture, of which then the OASIS plan for the reconstruction of Southwest Asia would be one major part. But it has to be put on the table as a joint package, because otherwise I think it will not work.
We have another question from a viewer from Southwest Asia, asking about, were there hidden political deals behind Assad leaving? But I think your suggestion of looking at the various analysts that you mentioned, that you can certainly find a lot of material there. So let's move on, because there's some very interesting questions for you. This is from a peace activist in the United Kingdom. He writes, The interviews given to Tucker Carlson by Russian President Putin and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov convince me that they are trying to reach out to the American public. Millions heard those interviews. I think the same intent is seen in Russian participation in Schiller Institute events, the latest being the interesting contributions from Dmitry Trenin at your event on Saturday. Do you think their voices are being heard in Washington, London, and Brussels?
Well, we are doing our best that they are being heard by putting such a program together. And, I can only ask all of you, including you from Great Britain, why don't you take these packages? I mean, we already have the panels out on our website, but we will for sure make shorter versions, like the different panels separately, but also certain combinations of people talking about specific topics, so that it's easier to watch. Why don't you take that and get it around everywhere? Put it in your social media, get it out to all of your networks, friends, colleagues, family members, because, and especially parliamentarians. I think we have to have a mobilization on the parliamentarians that they should stop sending the Taurus, in the case of Germany, to allowing the Taurus to go to Ukraine, which is another red line. But take the material of the conference and you get it around widely, because we did this conference, not just for the people who are watching it at one time, but it is meant to be ammunition, for organizing afterwards. And I think that there are a lot of things which are so much in flux. Like, for example, one topic which we discussed, which I think several speakers were touching upon, is Putin's use of the hypersonic missile, the Oreshnik. And, this, Ted Postol made an analysis based on the material he had available at the time. But Putin keeps talking about, he just made a statement yesterday again, where he said that Russia is at the point where they do not have to change or upgrade the nuclear doctrine any longer, or not much longer, because the focus on the Oreshnik technology and the ability to launch a large number of such missiles would make nuclear weapons obsolete. And I find this extremely intriguing. I mean, I think it's a complicated issue, but I cannot imagine that Putin would say this repeatedly if he had not very solid ground to say that. And the idea to make nuclear weapons obsolete rather than having arms control treaties only, is very important, because if you look at the arms control treaties, all of them have been cancelled. There is not one single one existing between NATO and Russia anymore. And, that puts the question of making nuclear weapons obsolete a very urgent question. And, this was discussed in some depth at our conference, but it for sure requires further debate, research, and thinking. So my advice to you is get this material out as widely as you can.
And join the Schiller Institute so that you can help us do that. Now we have an email from Ron Ridenour, who says he's an author, a journalist, and longtime peace activist. And he asks you, he said, I would like to know why you think the German state, not only the idiotic government, but in general, have allowed the Yankees, that is the Americans, to destroy Germany's economy. First, the sabotage of Nord Stream, then selling it and others its fracking gas, forcing it to send money and weapons and sanctions to murder Ukrainians and Russians. What is wrong with those people, he asks.
Yeah, that's the 64 million euro question. Well, I think, if you look at what happens to Syria, it's a tragedy. If you look at what happens to Germany, it's almost as bad a tragedy, not quite yet, but, very close, because as you correctly say, the pursuit of the present policies, including, the allowing of US medium range missiles on German territory from 2026 on, which Scholz agreed to. I mean, can you imagine this chancellor goes to the NATO summit in Washington and then shortly afterwards declares, oh, by the way, the Americans decided that they will install medium range missiles in 26 in Germany. Now, obviously, these missiles are nuclear capable. And why on earth should the Russians believe anybody in Germany when they say, oh no, we don't put nuclear weapons, or the Americans will not put nuclear weapons on these missiles, after all the many lies, the Merkel, who retrospectively almost looks like, a better option, even so I really didn't like the way how she lowered the intellectual level in Germany over her period of office. But she admitted that she and Hollande only agreed to the Minsk process, not to enforce it with the Ukrainians, or at least try to enforce it. No, just to gain time to arm the Ukrainians on a NATO level. She admitted it publicly, and it's being quoted the whole time by people all over the world since. Or Steinmeier, at our Schiller conference, Jan Czarnogórski, who is the former prime minister of Slovakia, he said that he was especially disappointed by Steinmeier because Steinmeier was in the middle of the Maidan coup. He was in Kiev when this happened, or the day before, and he knew all the forces involved because he was in charge of intelligence when he was cabinet chief of Chancellor Schröder before. And I said this many times. Why did Steinmeier not speak out? It would have made a difference. So, I can only say you have to understand the entire post-war period of Germany, and obviously taking it back even long before. But especially if you start with the post-war situation, how the soul of the Germans was attempted to be driven out with the Congress of Cultural Freedom, then the Frankfurt School, the 68er, which was a sort of beginning of this paradigm shift, anti-technology, largely Maoist, when China abandoned the Cultural Revolution because Deng Xiaoping decided to bring China on a course of economics progress, the people who had belonged to the K groups in Germany made the long march through the institutions, became foreign minister and all kinds of things. That did a lot to undermine the character of Germany, of the kind of Germany which was reconstructed in the post-war period, creating the German economic miracle. Then you had the Club of Rome inventing the ecology movement, and on and on. It had many phases. Naturally, there was a system whereby the occupying powers would select who would be in a leading position in the parties, in the other institutions. So despite the fact that Germany did formally gain a sovereignty in the 2+4 treaty in the case of German unification, in reality, it never got materialized. And, whenever a politician took a tiny step in this direction, something horrible happened to undo it, like the assassination of Alfred Herrhausen on the 30th of November 89, which was a signal to Kohl to not go in the direction of sovereignty. So I think the answer to your question is very, very complicated, but it does not apologize the Germans from not acting out and now taking responsibility, especially because of our history. We should not allow a return to the dark chapter of the 12 years of National Socialism. And that is in a different form, which is threatening the world right now, not from Germany alone, but from the power structures to be. And I think Germany does have a responsibility to learn from history, but I'm very concerned that a lot of my contemporaries are just disgusting cowards.
We have a relatively longer question from John Mulkins, who is the host and producer of the Peaceful Political Revolution in America podcast, which I'll send you separately, but he invites you to join him on his podcast to discuss this. And he says, I wish this sincerely and with gratitude for your work. So I'll get that question to you. I have two more questions here. This one I think is interesting. While there's much focus on the instability of governments in the West, especially the US, UK, France, and Germany, there's little attention in the Western media to what is happening to NATO allies in Asia. The fall of the Kishida government in Japan in October, and the chaos unleashed in South Korea when President Yoon declared martial law and was then nearly impeached. Do you think this political chaos is related to the attempts to extend NATO to the Pacific?
Absolutely. I mean, what you see right now is a phenomena where democracy is officially buried. I mean, you have an election in Georgia where the population basically votes pro Russia and not so friendly to the EU, because the EU behavior in the recent period towards its members is giving them a good reason to be very critical. So what happens? You have a repetition or attempt to repeat the Maidan coup by mobilizing NGOs, by a president who is I don't know if she's Georgian. She's born in Paris. She worked for the diplomatic service of France for several decades. She even worked for NATO. So she is now basically saying, that, that this is all Russian instigated, which is a dubious question. Then in Romania, you have a vote of a president, George, and he is basically accused that. Oh, no, not only accused. You have the highest court in Romania ruling that the entire election has to be repeated because apparently or supposedly, I don't know, there was Russian influence to cause this election. So you really, and naturally the same thing happened basically in you have a similar situation in South Korea, where a president is trying to oust the North Korean influence for 6 hours, declaring martial law. And unfortunately, the parliament intervened. But the feeling you get from all of these incidents is that there is now an attitude where the voters better vote in the right way, or else they have to repeat the vote until the vote is right. I mean, and that is not. It is so blatant that you cannot overlook it. So what it does, among other things, is that it completely discredits the rules-based order, because if everybody can see that these rules are being bent until they fit whatever the political intention is of the EU and NATO and so forth, the model loses its credibility, and these people may have in the short term the power to enforce it, but the erosion of the credibility of this system is explosive. I mean, you saw it with the Brexit. Now you see it with the collapse of the Macron government. You see it with the extreme instability in Germany, maybe early election on the 23rd of February. We don't know yet what happens actually in the no confidence vote for Scholz next Monday. So, I think that the political institutions get completely discredited. And I think this is not good, because, it breeds chaos, it breeds instability. And that is why I keep saying, that we have to have more intellectuals and responsible people who say we are the intelligent species. Why don't we try to give ourselves an order which allows our peaceful cooperation for everybody? I mean, that was a big discussion in the young republic in the United States, where in the New Federalists there were, a lot of contributions saying, what must we do to govern ourselves? And I think we have to ask that question on a global scale because, because of the UN Security Council veto power of the Permanent Five, the UN Security Council doesn't function anymore. The entire UN does not function anymore, but it is the only institution representing all the countries on the planet. And there is a lot of discussion about the urgent need to reform the United Nations because we have to have such a organization representing nations, and it's really an urgent question. So please, enter with us such a dialogue. How to make a new security and development architecture using the model of the Peace of Westphalia, which after all, did end 150 years of religious war and is a precedent that, warring parties can get together and stop when they realize that nobody would be the beneficiary if they continue.
Well, U.S. Secretary of State Blinken defines democracy as you do what we tell you or else. And that's the basic policy coming from the European Union. Helga, we have a comment that I think is interesting from Steve Kaler, who talks about the need to establish a government in Syria, but he says that perhaps Syria could join the Belt and Road Initiative along with 151 nations, and that would be a solution. Let me get to the final question here. We have someone who wrote in as a frustrated educator. And she said, this is a question generated by the fourth panel of the last weekend conference. She said, a glance at the cultural degeneration in the West shows that a classical renaissance is urgently needed, as you've suggested. But what can those of us who are not artists do to expedite the process?
Well, I think, you can use various pedagogies. You can download presentations, you can show them. I mean, you can invite people from the Schiller Institute to teach ad hoc classes to your pupils. I think we will make more pedagogicals along the lines of the topics discussed at the conference. You can, invite, actually, I would like to discuss your question with my colleagues, because I think it would be very useful if the Schiller Institute would put up a regular little program, which people like you could use. What is bel canto singing? Why do you need a Verdi tuning in classical music? Basics about the well-tempered system, things like that. I think we could put out a lot of such short pedagogicals. We could do so much more because we are a factory of ideas, but we need your support. And I don't only mean you who asked the question, I mean all of you, because if you look at what the Schiller Institute has done in the 40 years of our existence, and we have our present webpage, but we also have a previous webpage, which has an enormous amount of archive material, a lot of original research, which you do not easily find elsewhere, because it's very, very condensed intellectual work of a lot of people. I think we could absolutely remedy almost any situation, but we need more people who have the courage and the passion and love for humanity, that they step in at this crucial crisis moment and, help us, join us, become a member, join our activities, because we could do a lot more if we had more people, more resources. Donate to the Schiller Institute, because, it is right now one of the very few organizations who can claim that we really would know how to get out of this crisis. And, but we need to have more resources. We could do advertisement for our intelligence analysis and things like that. So join us. It's the best thing you can do right now for peace.
And finally, I assume this Friday there'll be a continuation of the weekly International Peace Coalition Zoom meetings. Can you tell us something about that, Helga?
Yes, we for sure will discuss the two urgent topics, the absolute change in Southwest Asia. We already have Senator Richard Black, who agreed. He's a Syria expert of the first order. He has traveled in the country many times, so he will be on. And I'm sure that there will be other people from the region, from the peace movement in, around Israel, the Palestinian cause. So that will be one big topic. And then naturally, the other big topic will be, where are we at in the crisis of Ukraine? What is this discussion about the Oreshnik? What is the discussion about winning a tactical nuclear war? So we will, these two topics will be the main focus. So you should absolutely participate and bring at least one other person and your friends.
Well, Helga, thank you for joining us today. I have to say that 40 years of work with the Schiller Institute seems to have gone by in the blink of an eye, and it's been a pleasure working with you that whole time over 40 years. And let's see if we can extend it into the future to win the fight. So we'll see you again on Friday.
Yes, thank you. Till soon.